So we discussed the Democrats' response to the looming foreclosure and eviction crisis. It's not good. The Republicans' response is to show you their middle finger. The Democrats' response is to say, hey, as you're losing your home, we're going to get you a lawyer. So it's just not, none of this is enough, obviously. What you need to do is just totally ban foreclosures and evictions, and you need to do a bailout from the bottom up for once in our lives. Every time there's been a bailout, it's always top down. It's always like, give it to the corporations, give it to the rich, and then let's hope they do the right thing. Nobody ever says just bail out the people. I'm saying it, bail out the people. Everybody who's going to lose their home, it's not their fault. It's the fault of coronavirus, it's the fault of bad governance, and it's the fault of the economy imploding. It's not the fault of the individuals, obviously. I mean, that should require zero convincing. So since it's not their fault, of course we need to do something about this, and nobody's doing enough. Well, just how bad is this crisis? Well, we have some new numbers here from CNBC, and buckle up, because this is stunning. So this is the percentage in each state facing eviction. Renter households, this is. So just look at some of those numbers. I mean, we're not going to go through all of them, but just, scan over what you see there. And tell me that this is not one of the most terrifying things you've ever seen. I believe the low number is 22% in Vermont. So even the low number, it's a quarter of people in Vermont who can't make their housing payment. And then when you look at some of the highs, guys, we got 59% of renters in West Virginia can't make their payment. 59%. And you got a bunch of others in that ballpark, 58% in Tennessee, 55% in Mississippi, 50% in Louisiana, 48% in Texas, 46% in New York. I don't know how to say this any clearer. We've never seen a crisis of this magnitude, ever. Ever. The closest thing is the Great Depression. I mean, but when you're talking about 40% of the country, 50% of the country is like, I can't put a roof over my head, that's a failed state. That's a failed system. The mask has been ripped off. Totally ripped off of our crumbling empire. All it took, we were a house of cards, and all it took, or Jenga, remember the game Jenga? You just take the wrong thing out, and then boom, it all comes tumbling down. That's us. That's us. And that's what COVID-19 did. All the extreme income and wealth inequality, all these deep problems, these rifts in society. One pandemic, and boom, it's a wrap. So just to give you some more information real quick, by one estimate, oh Jesus, this is the highest number I've seen yet. By one estimate, some 40 million Americans could be evicted during COVID. COVID is still, it's at a peak, and we're talking about still maybe stopping the moratorium on evictions and foreclosures. It's at a peak. What are you doing? Obviously, it's going to spread the virus more. But even if it didn't, again, it's not their fault, so how could we just sit idly by and watch this happen to people? One estimate, 40 million Americans could be evicted during the public health crisis. Now, just to put that in perspective, in 2016, there were 2.3 million evictions. 2.3 million in 2016, 40 million. It could be up to 40 million coming shortly. And then how's this for a fact? I find this amazing because with all the protests going on about criminal justice, how race is the center of the conversation because of police brutality and what happened to George Floyd, how many places have you heard this fact? people of color are especially vulnerable, while almost half of white tenants say they're highly confident they can continue to pay their rent. Only 26% of African-American tenants could say the same. And this is, one of my main problems with our political system, is that you have corporations and you have politicians who are more than willing to lend symbolic support to communities of color. Oh, you want me to take a knee? I'll take a knee. You want me to hold a fist up and say Black Lives Matter? I'll hold a fist up and say Black Lives Matter. You want me to, pull down old episodes of the Golden Girls for problematic jokes or whatever? Fine. You want to get rid of Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben? Cool. But it's all empty virtue signaling. One of the most important points, and when you say this, you get called a class reductionist, but one of the most important points is that, yes, when it comes to key economic and health indicators, communities of color are getting hammered. So what's the solution in a situation like that? The solutions are universal. The solutions are, let's have Medicare for all and everybody gets health care. Well, when it's communities of color that are most harmed at the fact that, at the lack of health care in the country, then yes, having universal health care, all of a sudden it becomes a racial justice issue as well. Wages. Did you know it's mostly women who make the minimum wage? So if you raise the minimum wage to a living wage, that's a feminist issue. Now, again, if you say that, you're not allowed to say this stuff. If you say this stuff, you get looked at like a dirty class reductionist and, you're not woke enough or whatever. But why is it viewed as sufficiently woke when people ignore this fact? But I'm the one telling you the fact. The fact is, people of color are more vulnerable in this housing crisis. Half of white renters say, I'm certain I could pay the rent. It's only 26% of black renters. You didn't hear that fact anywhere else. Now, yes, we're talking about racial justice in the context of how the economy is screwing people of color, but that counts and that matters. And there's a reason why you never hear your run-of-the-mill politicians bring this up, because they don't want to do dick about it. Do you understand? It's easy to take a knee. It's easy to put a fist up and say Black Lives Matter. It's easy to give you symbolism all day long until the cows come home. It's easy to browbeat people and tell them to read the book White Fragility, which basically says, hey, if you're white, you need to apologize and you're a piece of shit and you need to bend the knee and you need to view race in this neoliberal, empty, vacuous framework. It's easy to do that stuff. What's hard is actually addressing the systems of racism and inequality. And this is a system of racism and inequality. But the solutions are universal. You know how you fix this? You put a ban on why do I keep saying moratoriums? You put a ban or a moratorium on foreclosures and evictions. That's the way you fix it. Now, you won't get credit from the woke crowd if you do such a thing. People won't say that, oh, wow, that's a big win for racial justice. But it is. And it's also a big win for justice. So, again, these are the things you're not allowed to say, but I'm saying them. And people are not wrapping their minds around what's happening and what's coming. This is a crisis that we've never seen in our lifetimes, man. You want to talk about civil unrest? It's going to get beyond ugly. The George Floyd protests are just a warm-up. This is going to get out of control unless something is done. And it needs to be done ASAP, and it needs to be big, and it needs to be bold. At the very least, we need a new FDR. At the very least, we need giant systemic reform.